Hello, sleepy summoner, nestled in the quiet of night, with only the whisper of wind and the soft rhythm of your breath to keep you company. Allow yourself to drift through a tale woven from the legends of Demacia. This is not a tale of roaring battles and blinding triumph, but a gentle journey through the life of a prince who would be king, a man known to his people as Jarvan IV. We will wander alongside him through his days of youth and duty, through fields of golden grain and halls of marble, and we will listen to the murmurs of his heart as he learns what it means to bear the weight of a crown. This story is meant to soothe and to calm, to guide your mind toward peace as you slip deeper into slumber. In the hush of this moment, imagine the great stone walls of the great city gleaming beneath a clear dawn, and allow the soft thread of memory to begin. Jarvan came into the world under the shadow of loss and the light of hope. His mother, the Lady Catherine, was beloved by the people of Demacia for her kindness and her gentle strength. Shortly after the coronation of his father, King Jarvan III, whispers of celebration drifted through the city. Bells rang in the great city for a day and a night to herald the news that the royal couple were expecting a child. Courtyards were filled with flowers, and songs were sung in taverns, prayers offered in temples, hearts warmed by the thought of new life. When the child arrived, he was named for his father's line, and the hope of the kingdom rested upon him. Yet joy and sorrow often walked together. The same day that Demacia welcomed its new heir, it mourned the death of its queen. Lady Catherine, ever courageous, never held her son. Her passing filled the castle with quiet grief, and the king vowed never again to take a wife. All his hopes and all his affections he poured into his tiny son. The boy who would be Jarvan IV grew up within halls carved from stone and graced with banners depicting winged lions and the shining sun of Demacia. He had no memory of his mother, yet the memory of her lingered in the way servants spoke of her and in the calm smile etched in a painted portrait that hung in his chamber. His father ensured he received a thorough education not only in letters and numbers, but in the virtues that Demacia held dear. At an early age, Jarvan learned of charity, of the value of giving to those less fortunate. He learned that duty is not a burden to chafe against, but an honor to be embraced. His world was structured and ordered. Tutors recited the histories of ancient battles, of the founding of the great city, of the heroes who stood against invasions when Demacia was little more than a dream hidden among forests and mountains. Even as a child, Jarvan was drawn to the stories of valor and sacrifice. But what captured his imagination most were tales of ordinary people. Sitting upon a cushion with legs crossed, he listened to tales of farmers who left their plows to defend their homes and returned quietly to their fields once the threat had passed. He heard of healers who set aside fear to tend the wounded. From these stories he gleaned that heroism dwells not only in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts of kindness. In the quiet of his chambers at night, he would sometimes sit by the window, looking out over the city lights. He wondered what it might feel like to walk unnoticed through a crowded market, to learn the names of those who sang songs in the taverns, to see for himself the faces of the people he was told he would one day protect. Under the watchful eyes of his tutors, the young prince also learned to ride and to fight. A training yard overlooked by olive trees became his second classroom. His instructors taught him how to hold a sword, how to keep his balance atop a spirited steed, how to listen for the rhythm of an opponent's breathing. He learned to respect his weapons and to care for them, not because they made him powerful, but because they were tools meant to serve a greater purpose. His days were structured with lessons and practice, and yet there were quiet pockets of time when he would slip away to sit beneath the shade of an elm, practicing his letters by scratching lines in the dirt or reading scrolls filled with poetry from faraway lands. When Jarvan was 7, a foreigner arrived at court who would change his life. Xinjiao, hailing from distant Ionia, came into the service of King Jarvan III as his seneschal and protector. Tall and calm, with eyes that held storms and stillness in equal measure, Xinjiao spoke of philosophies that differed from the rigid order of Demacia. He told the young prince stories of mountains blanketed in cherry blossoms, of students who sought enlightenment through meditation, of warriors who wielded spears as an extension of their spirit. Under Xin Zhao's guidance, Jarvan learned to temper his natural impatience. When frustration rose in him over a difficult lesson, Xin Zhao would gently remind him to breathe and to consider whether his anger served him. He taught Jarvan that strength did not always mean striking first, but sometimes waiting, listening, and choosing the right moment. It was also during these years that Jarvan met another companion who would be as close as a brother. A boy of similar age from the Crown Guard family, Garen, arrived at the training yards one crisp autumn morning. His laughter carried on the wind, and there was a fierce determination in his bright eyes. Garen possessed a clarity of purpose that Jarvan admired. The two struck up a friendship that deepened with each passing day. They ran through the castle corridors with wooden swords, imagining themselves defending the walls against invaders. They climbed the old oak tree by the barracks, sharing stories and dreams. Jarvan admired Garen's sheer physical strength and unwavering loyalty, and Garen looked up to the prince's quick mind and ability to see strategies beyond the immediate battle. Years unfolded gently. Jarvan grew taller, his shoulders broadening with the weight of steel and expectation. He continued his studies in tactics and history, often surprising his tutors with insightful questions that hinted at compassion for the people more than ambition for conquest. When he was 15, his father allowed him to accompany inspection tours of the outer villages. Riding through fields of wheat swaying like waves under the sun, Jarvan felt the cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh bread and wildflowers. Farmers bowed deeply as he passed, their faces lined by years of toil and weather. He would nod in return, meeting their gaze with respect rather than aloofness. In one village, he stopped to help lift fallen barrels after a storm had blown through, and later listened to an elderly woman recount the last time Noxian marauders had threatened their home. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with pride in how her sons and neighbors had stood together to drive the raiders away. These journeys impressed upon Jarvan that leadership meant more than commanding from a lofty hall. It meant understanding the lives of those under his care. On evenings when he returned to the palace, he would sit quietly before the hearth, recounting what he had seen to his father. King Jarvan III listened attentively, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning thoughtfully. The king reminded his son that a ruler must balance compassion with firmness, for the safety of the realm depended on clear decisions. Yet he did not discourage Jarvan's curiosity about the common folk. Instead, he arranged for the prince to speak with scholars and merchants from other regions, widening his view of the world. He wanted his son to appreciate that Demacia did not exist in isolation. The day arrived when Jarvan came of age. He stood in the great hall, beneath banners embroidered with the golden sunburst, the smell of incense mixing with the scent of polished wood. His father placed upon him the honorary rank of general, symbolized by a cloak trimmed with silver. While tradition did not demand that the heir to the throne take up arms, Jarvan's resolve burned quietly within him. He wished to prove not only his courage, but also his ability to guide others. When he spoke to his father of his desire to lead an expedition beyond the Argent Mountains, where pockets of unrest had been reported, the king gave his blessing, albeit with caution. "Do not seek glory for its own sake," the king admonished, his gaze serious. "Seek only to protect and to serve." Jarvan nodded, feeling the weight of every eye upon him as he prepared to leave the safety of the great city. Across the mountains lay lands once allied with Demacia, now contested by the empire of Noxus. Bands of reavers and warring tribes roamed the valleys, preying upon villages and travelers. Reports had come of creatures called Argoth sinewy beings that moved in swarms, guided by a queen whose will bound them. They overwhelmed settlements by sheer number, their small forms merging into a single mass of darkness. Jarvan's mind turned over strategies as he and his advisors studied maps. General Misar and General Ibel, both seasoned commanders, placed cones of ivory and ebony upon the table to represent troops and enemies. Jarvan saw the difference between the featureless stones and the lives they symbolized. It troubled him to think of hundreds of soldiers reduced to a small piece of wood. He reminded himself that each stone represented a heartbeat, a family waiting at home, a story yet to be written. The sky was pale when Jarvan rode out at the head of his column. Flags snapped in the wind, and the hooves of horses stirred dust along the road. Garen rode beside him, his armor glinting like dawn. Shinjao followed closely, ready to offer counsel. As they approached the village of Evenmore, the ground trembled. A dark cloud spilled over the horizon, resolving into a mass of Argoth. Jarvan's hands tightened on the reins. He knew attacking head-on would be folly. The Argoth swarmed over their prey, suffocating all resistance. Within their ranks was the queen, marked on their maps as a red jasper figurine deep in the heart of the ebony mass. He remembered the words of General Misar. Dividing them was the only hope. As the horde drew nearer, Jarvan gathered his commanders beneath a canvas tent. Sweat glistened on foreheads as they considered their options. Some urged retreat, suggesting they return with reinforcements the following day. But Jarvan looked beyond the tent to where Evenmore lay, its cottages quiet under a morning mist. He imagined the families within, going about their morning chores, unaware of the approaching danger. The thought of leaving them weighed heavily upon him. "We cannot abandon these people," he said quietly, his voice steady. "They rely on us. We must find another way." He traced his finger along the map, drawing a path between outcroppings and old stone walls. He proposed splitting the cavalry into 2 units, one to create a feint and lure the swarm toward a narrow defile, the other to circle through the woods and strike at the queen when the horde was divided. General Ibel's eyes narrowed as she considered the plan. It will take precise timing, she warned. If either unit delays, the entire formation could be engulfed. Jarvan nodded. He trusted his soldiers and trusted himself. The life he had led had been sheltered in many ways, yet he felt an inner compass guiding him now. The decision was made. Riders took their positions, hearts steady, breathing slow. When at last the mass of Argoth spilled over the valley, Jarvan gave the signal. Garen led the first unit, charging boldly to draw the horde toward the rocky pass. The ground shook beneath the swarm, and dust filled the air. With the creature's attention fixed on the decoy, Jarvan guided his own unit through a copse of pines. Branches brushed his shoulders, and sunlight dappled the forest floor. He could hear the distant cries of battle, but forced himself to remain calm. Emerging from the trees, he saw the Queen, a larger Argoth surrounded by smaller guardians, her movements dictating theirs like a conductor leading a symphony. Jarvan urged his horse forward, his lance leveled, his mind quiet. He did not think of the risk to himself, but of the villagers sleeping behind thick wooden doors and the farmers who had bowed to him on his previous journeys. He breathed deeply, feeling Xinjiao's lessons steady his heartbeat. The moment stretched as if in a dream. With a shout, he led his unit into the fray. Swords flashed, but the description of the battle is not filled with blood or fury. It was a dance of purpose, a weaving between shadows. As the Argoth turned to face this new threat, Garen's force burst from the pass, closing in from behind. Caught between two fronts, the swarm faltered. The Queen hesitated, and in that heartbeat, Jarvan's lance found its mark. The swarm shuddered and fell into disarray. The men drove the remaining creatures away, and the valley grew quiet once more, save for the wind stirring the long grass. Evenmore's people emerged from their cottages slowly, eyes wide with gratitude and wonder. An elderly man clasped Jarvan's hand, his grip strong despite his years. "You risked much for us," he murmured. "Thank you." Jarvan felt humbled. He shook his head gently. "It is my duty," he replied. Duty, he was learning, was not a heavy chain, but a ribbon that linked him to the people he served. As the sun climbed higher and birds resumed their songs, Jarvan looked over his men. They were tired, but alive. He did not rejoice in victory for himself. Instead, he was grateful for the safety of the villagers and for the lessons etched quietly into his heart. He understood now that leadership was not about glory. It was about standing where he was needed most. Time carried Jarvan forward, each day adding layers to his understanding. Shortly after the campaign against the Argoth, news reached the capital that Noxian forces had been stirring beyond the Argent Mountains, pushing into territories that had long belonged to Demacia's allies. Jarvan felt a simmering resolve. He had seen what came of hesitation, and he wished to protect those lands from chaos. With his father's cautious approval, he prepared to lead a contingent of soldiers to repel the incursions. Flags were stitched, swords sharpened, and supplies gathered. Before he departed, the king embraced him, his expression a mixture of pride and worry. "Remember who you are," he said. "You carry not only our name, but our hopes." The road to the border was lined with ancient oaks, their leaves whispering with secrets. Jarvan rode at the head of his army, the sun gleaming on his armor. He thought of the early heroes of Demacia and of the farmers he had met. He resolved that his actions would honor both. They marched through villages where people cheered softly and pressed breads and flowers into the soldiers' hands. For days they travelled, the landscape changing from gentle hills to rugged foothills. At night, Jarvan sat by the campfire, listening to stories shared by young recruits. Some spoke of families left behind, others of dreams they hoped to fulfill. He shared his own thoughts in return, finding that speaking as one of them rather than above them forged stronger bonds. Xinjiao remained near, offering advice when it was sought and silence when it was needed. At last they reached the contested land. Burned out farmsteads and trampled crops bore witness to recent violence. Smoke still rose from smouldering ruins, and the smell of charred wood hung heavy. Jarvan's heart tightened. He rode through the desolation with a heavy step, sending scouts ahead to gather information. Over the next weeks, his armies engaged Noxian reavers in a series of skirmishes. Jarvan's tactical instincts guided them to victory after victory, yet each success was tempered by the grief of what they witnessed. Villages had been displaced, fields salted, wells fouled. Jarvan ordered his men to help rebuild, to share rations with those in need. He did not simply count their triumphs on the battlefield, he counted the lives they touched and the hands they lifted. As the campaign pressed deeper into enemy-held territory, a rumor reached the prince. The gates of morning, a mountain pass, had fallen, leaving Demacia's flank exposed. Against the advice of some of his lieutenants, who urged caution and consolidation, Jarvan resolved to press onward into Noxian territory. He saw it as an opportunity to strike at the heart of the enemy, to prevent further incursions. His determination, though born of a desire to protect, led him deeper into treacherous terrain. His battalions spread thin to cover more ground, and the sense of safety began to fray. One evening, as the light faded and shadows lengthened, Noxian warbands encircled his forces. Surprised and outnumbered, his men formed defensive lines, but the enemy pressure was relentless. The battle that followed was unlike the controlled engagements he had commanded before. The night rang with the clash of steel, the thud of shields meeting blades. Yet, even in the chaos, Jarvan tried to keep his mind clear. He called out orders to regroup, to protect the wounded, to pull back in an orderly manner. But the Noxian warbands had prepared well. They harried from the flanks, cutting off avenues of retreat. When it became clear that the battle could not be won that day, Jarvan ordered a tactical withdrawal into the forests, hoping to lose their pursuers among the trees. A handful of soldiers, Garen among them, fought to keep the path clear as Jarvan shepherded the survivors. They ran through undergrowth and leapt over fallen logs, breath burning in their lungs. For days they were hunted. The forest became a labyrinth of shadows and whispered movements. Jarvan's clothes were torn, his body bruised, his spirit tested. Hunger gnawed at him, and exhaustion weighted his limbs. Still, he refused to surrender. He thought of his father, of the trust placed in him, and of the men who looked to him for guidance. When an arrow pierced his side, he gritted his teeth, pressing a cloth to stem the bleeding. Each step became a meditation. He focused on the sound of his breath and the soft rustle of leaves, on the small glimpses of sky through branches. He was no longer a prince in a gleaming hall. He was a man in the wilderness, equal to those he led. On the third night, as rain began to fall in a gentle mist, Jarvan's strength failed. Beneath the sheltering boughs of a great oak, he collapsed, his vision blurring. He drifted between wakefulness and sleep, between reality and dreams. In that liminal space, he saw images. His mother's face softened by light, his father standing tall, the faces of villagers he had sworn to protect. He heard the rush of water and the roar of a distant dragon. A sense of shame curled through him. He felt he had failed his family and his kingdom. Yet, even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a new presence entered his mind, a warm, steady heartbeat. He felt strong arms lift him, felt the sway of movement as he was carried. When Jarvan opened his eyes fully, he found himself lying on a straw pallet in a simple room. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting soft light over rough-hewn walls. The air smelled of herbs and rain. Sitting beside him was a woman with skin tinted a deep violet, her hair braided in intricate patterns. Her eyes held a glow that was not entirely human. She introduced herself as Shyvana. Her voice was gentle, yet carried an ancient resonance. She told him she had been drawn to his camp by the smell of blood and the sound of battle. When she saw him wounded beneath the tree, she could not leave him to die. Without ceremony or expectation, she had lifted him onto her shoulders and carried him through forest and field back toward Demacia. As days turned into nights, Jarvan recovered slowly. The castle to which Shyvana had brought him was old, standing on the fringes of Demacian territory. Its stones were weathered, and its halls echoed with distant memories. The garrison there, commanded by soldiers who had retired from active duty, took in the strange duo with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. Shyvana tended to Jarvan's wounds with hands that were both strong and tender. She spoke little of herself, but the prince sensed a profound loneliness in her. He learned that she was no ordinary woman, but a half-dragon, born of an elemental dragon named Iva and a human man. Her existence was marked by distrust from those who feared what they did not understand. Yet here she was, risking her life to save his. As Jarvan regained his strength, news reached the castle that a massive dragon was headed their way. The description matched Iva, the mother who hunted Shyvana, a creature of fire and fury, driven by the instinct to reclaim what had been taken from her. Shyvana's face tightened at the mention. She confessed that she had stolen an egg from her mother in the hope of proving herself worthy of a different life, and that Iva now sought vengeance. Jarvan listened, feeling the weight of her story settle beside his own. Despite his still healing wounds, a resolve rose within him. He could not allow this place and its people to be destroyed, nor could he let Shyvana face her pursuer alone. He saw in her the same desire he felt, to be more than what fate seemed to dictate. The day of the dragon's arrival dawned in an uneasy hush. Clouds gathered, casting the sky into muted greys. The watchmen upon the walls of the old castle spotted a shape on the horizon, vast wings beating, fire flickering at its maw. Soldiers gripped their spears, fear mingling with awe. Jarvan, still sore, wrapped bandages tight around his torso, donned his armor, and took up his lance. He walked with a limp, pain slicing through him with each step, but he held his back straight. Standing beside him on the battlements, Shyvana's form shifted. Scales shimmered across her skin, and crimson wings unfurled from her shoulders. In a heartbeat, she leapt into the sky, meeting her mother in the air. The battle that followed was a dance of fire and steel. Eva's roars shook the very stones, and Shyvana's flame met her mother's blaze with equal heat. Jarvan watched from below, his heart pounding, not from fear of the dragon, but from the understanding that Shyvana fought both for her own freedom and for the safety of those she barely knew. When Eva's fury turned toward the castle walls, the men flinched, but Jarvan's voice rose above the din, calm and clear. He rallied his soldiers, reminding them gently of their strength when they stood together. He directed healers to aid the wounded and archers to aim for the dragon's wings. When some men trembled, he placed a steady hand on their shoulders, lending them his courage. Shyvana pressed the dragon back through sheer will, but it was the unified efforts of those on the ground that kept Eva from laying waste to the castle. Finally, with a cry that echoed across the valley, Shyvana drove her claws into her mother's heart. The great dragon convulsed, then fell, its immense body crashing into the earth beyond the walls. The silence that followed was filled with the crackle of extinguished flames and the ragged breaths of those who had survived. When it was over, Shyvana landed lightly upon the courtyard stones, the heat of battle still shimmering around her. Jarvan approached her, his eyes reflecting gratitude and respect. He understood that without her, he would have died in the forest, and without her, the castle would have been lost. He reached out his hand and she took it, the scales on her palm warm and smooth. "You have shown me what true courage is," he said softly. "If you will accept, I would have you stand by my side. Demacia may not understand you yet, but I will ensure you have a place among us." Shyvana considered him for a long moment. Then she nodded, the corner of her mouth tilting upward in a rare smile. In that instant, a bond was forged, not of duty alone, but of mutual respect and shared purpose. With the dragon's skull secured as proof of their triumph, Jarvan and Shyvana journeyed back to the great city. Their procession was both solemn and celebratory. Villagers along the road gasped at the sight of the enormous skull, its jagged teeth gleaming, and whispered prayers of thanks. Children reached out to touch the dragon's scales, wide-eyed with wonder. The journey took days, each mile giving Jarvan time to reflect on all that had happened. When, at last, the spires of the capital rose above the horizon, glinting in the light like carved ice, his heart swelled. He had been gone what felt like a lifetime, and he was coming home a different man. The reunion at court was emotional. King Jarvan III embraced his son tightly, tears glistening in his eyes. The weight that had bowed his shoulders since news of his son's disappearance lifted, if only a little. He thanked Shyvana with genuine sincerity, his voice thick with feeling. Yet not all in attendance were so moved. Whispers rustled like dry leaves among some of the gathered nobles. They looked askance at Shyvana, their gaze lingering on the violet hue of her skin and the subtle gleam of scales along her jaw. Some questioned the wisdom of allowing a creature not entirely human to stand beside the heir to the throne. Jarvan saw their doubt, but he held his head high and stood closer to Shyvana, his presence alone a quiet statement of his intent. "She saved my life," he told them calmly. "Her courage is beyond reproach. Let us judge her by her deeds, not by our fear of what is different." Life returned to its rhythms, though Jarvan's days were now filled with both military duties and matters of state. Garen was appointed sword captain of the Dauntless Vanguard, an elite force tasked with defending the realm. Together with Shyvana and veterans from Renwall, they worked to strengthen border garrisons and to refine training for new recruits. Jarvan would rise early, spar in the training yard, then spend long hours seated at tables piled high with reports and petitions. He listened to merchants speak of trade disputes, to farmers speak of failed crops, to artisans plead for fair wages. He learned to balance the demands of nobility with the needs of the common people. Jinzhao remained his advisor, offering guidance when decisions seemed tangled. High Marshal Tiana Crownguard, Garen's aunt, became a trusted voice, her experience in matters of law and order invaluable. Even as Jarvan worked to fortify the kingdom and bind his people together, a new unease began to grow within Demacia. The Magi Seeker Order, tasked with locating and containing those with magical talent, gained greater support among certain noble families. Fear can be like a slow poison, spreading unseen until it clouds judgment. Tales of mages losing control and causing harm were repeated in parlors and taverns. The mage seekers' methods grew harsher. Those who displayed any hint of magical ability were arrested, shackled with petrischite, and taken away. Parents whispered to their children to hide their gifts. Neighbors looked at one another with suspicion. Jarvan, who had seen the devastation caused by unchecked magic on distant battlefields, felt torn. He understood the desire to protect, yet he also saw that fear was making his people cruel. One evening, he met with his father and several high-ranking nobles to discuss the growing tension. Voices rose and fell as arguments were made. Some insisted that strict enforcement was the only way to ensure safety. Others, including Jarvan, counseled caution and compassion. "Strength without empathy is tyranny," he said quietly, recalling the faces of Shaivana and the villagers he had met. The king listened, brow furrowed. He had long balanced the competing demands of tradition and mercy. In the end, he agreed to review the practices of the Magi Seekers, but change comes slowly in a realm built upon order. The mood of the kingdom shifted, and Jarvan sensed a storm on the horizon. The storm broke sooner than anyone expected. In the depths of the great city, in a prison built of stone and petricite, a mage named Silas had been held for years. Bound by chains that suppressed his magic, he had grown bitter and angry. He resented the crown and the mage seekers for imprisoning him for a power he never asked for. Through whispered conversations and the aid of a sympathetic noblewoman, he learned a way to break his bonds. When the chance came, he took it. With stolen magic roaring through his veins, Silas freed himself and other mages, leading an uprising that swept through the capital like wildfire. Shackles were shattered, torches were lit, and the anger of those who had been oppressed ignited into rebellion. The great city, which had known peace for decades, suddenly shook with the sound of battle within its own streets. Jarvan was not in the capital when the rebellion began. He was inspecting garrisons in the countryside, unaware of the simmering resentment that had reached its boiling point. Messengers arrived breathless, their faces pale. Their words stole the breath from his lungs. The capital was under attack, and the palace itself was threatened. Without hesitation, Jarvan gathered his forces and rode hard for the city. The journey seemed endless. Every hoofbeat pounded with urgency and dread. He could not imagine that the place he had always considered unassailable could be breached from within. When he reached the great city, he found smoke rising and shouts echoing through streets he had walked as a child. Fires burned in the lower quarters, and citizens ran in fear. He pressed forward, his mind singularly focused on the palace and the safety of his father. Fighting through narrow alleys and across courtyards, he came upon scenes that pained him. Mage-seeker barracks overrun, soldiers disarmed and tending to wounded comrades, walls marked with scorch and scar. He called out orders, working to restore order without unleashing unnecessary force. He knew that not all who fought against the crown wanted destruction. Many were simply desperate to be heard. As he neared the palace, a hush seemed to fall, as though the world held its breath. The grand doors stood ajar, their polished wood marred by burns. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and the metallic tang of fear. Jarvan ran through halls that echoed with memory, past tapestries depicting ancestral victories. He called out for his father, his voice cracking. In the throne room, beneath a vaulted ceiling, he found King Jarvan IV lying still upon the floor. The crown lay beside him, fallen, its polished surface dulled by ash. The king's eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling frescoes. Kneeling beside him, Jarvan felt his heart rupture. The weight of loss descended upon him like a shroud. He took his father's hand and pressed it to his brow. For a long moment he could not move. Memories flooded him, his father teaching him to ride, admonishing him kindly, embracing him upon his return from the mountains. Tears flowed freely. There were no words strong enough to contain the grief. Around him, the palace stood in disarray. In the corridors beyond, shouts and footfalls continued, the rebellion not yet quelled. Yet, in that moment, time seemed to slow. Jarvan whispered a promise to his father that he would protect Demacia and strive to lead with wisdom and compassion. As he rose, he felt the absence of the man who had been his anchor his entire life. The days that followed were some of the darkest Jarvan had known. He worked tirelessly to restore peace, calling for calm, negotiating with those who had taken up arms, offering amnesty to those who would lay down their weapons, and seeking out those who refused to cease their violence. Shyvana stood by his side, her presence a reminder that bridging divides was possible. Garen and the dauntless vanguard worked to secure key locations without allowing fear to drive them to brutality. Lux, Garen's younger sister, whose own magical abilities had been kept secret, struggled with her loyalty to her family and her empathy for those persecuted. Jarvan listened to her quietly when she sought counsel, understanding the pain of being pulled between duty and love. Eventually, the rebellion was quelled. Silas fled the city, his revolution incomplete, but his message unignorable. Demacia had been wounded, not by an invading force, but by its own policies and prejudices. Jarvan stood amid the aftermath, listening to the sobbing of a mother whose son had been taken away, feeling the anger of a young mage who had lost her home, hearing the fears of nobles who saw their world upended. He realized that if Demacia were to endure, it could not simply return to the way things had been. The old ways of suppression had fostered resentment that erupted in fire. Something new needed to emerge, something that balanced safety with compassion. Yet many questioned Jarvan's ability to lead such change. Some nobles whispered that his kindness toward Shyvana and his sympathy for those afflicted by magic made him weak. Others worried that his resolve had hardened too much after his father's death. Jarvan, for his part, felt an ocean of turmoil within. His political stance toward mages had indeed hardened, influenced by the pain of losing his father and the chaos he had witnessed. He feared that loosening control could lead to further unrest. At the same time, he could not deny that the harsh policies of the Meiji Seekers had been a catalyst for rebellion. He found himself at a crossroads, pulled between tradition and reform. In this time, he sought counsel from those he trusted. He spoke with High Marshal Tiana Crown Guard, whose wisdom had been forged in decades of service, and he listened to Garen, whose loyalty was unwavering, but whose perspective was grounded in honor. He continued to practice the meditative techniques Jin Zhao had taught him, seeking clarity in stillness. In the months after the uprising, Jarvan deliberately delayed his own coronation. He was heir apparent, and many expected him to take the crown quickly to provide stability. But Jarvan understood that the crown was not simply a symbol to be worn. It was a promise. He needed time to examine his conscience and to consider the allegiances that had shifted. He walked through the gardens his mother had once tended, feeling the brush of rosemary and lavender against his fingertips. He spent nights in the armory, running his hands over swords that had belonged to his ancestors. He sat by the tomb of his father, whispering questions into the quiet. Was he meant to be a ruler of iron will or a king of gentle understanding? Could he be both? He continued to travel through Demacia, this time not only to inspect garrisons but to listen. He met with villagers whose barns had been burned in the uprising, with mages who now lived in secret, with soldiers who had lost comrades. He visited coastal towns where fishermen spoke of storms and with shepherds in the highlands who knew little of politics. At each stop, he spoke less and listened more. Slowly, he began to see threads that might be woven into a new tapestry for his kingdom. The people wanted safety, certainly, but they also wanted fairness. They wanted to be heard, not silenced. They wished to trust their leaders, not fear them. Jarvan knew that forging such trust would require patience and humility. He also spent time with Shyvana, whose friendship had deepened into a quiet companionship built on mutual respect. In the early morning hours, before the city awoke, they would walk along the outer walls, the mist rising from the river, their footsteps soft on stone. Shyvana spoke of her struggles to find belonging, of the sting of prejudice, and of the peace she felt when she fought alongside those who accepted her. Jarvan shared his fears of failing his father's legacy and of repeating his father's mistakes. Together they sat in comfortable silence, the presence of one another a balm. When Shyvana considered leaving Demacia to avoid the cold stares of those who distrusted her, Jarvan placed his hand over hers. "Stay," he said simply. "Your presence reminds me of the kind of world I wish to build." In time, though, Shyvana would go on her own journey, drawn to places where she could explore her dual nature without judgment. Even as she left, the bond they had formed remained, a thread that tied them across distance and time. In the training yards, Jarvan continued to hone his skills, not because he sought glory, but because he believed that a leader who asked others to fight must not shrink from doing so himself. He sparred with Garen, their wooden blades clacking softly in the morning air. He practiced with the recruits, praising their improvements and correcting their stances. He also revisited the teachings of Xinjiao, sitting quietly to meditate, feeling the flow of breath and thought, observing his own mind with compassion rather than judgment. Xinjiao reminded him that clarity often came not in the heat of decision, but in the calm that followed. "Water looks muddy when it is agitated," he said softly, Let it settle, and you will see to the bottom. Slowly, Jarvan began to draft proposals for reforms. He envisioned an order that would regulate magic without dehumanizing those who possessed it. He sought to instill transparency into the practices of the mage seekers, to limit abuses, and to provide pathways for mages to contribute to society. He proposed systems wherein those with magical talents might serve under supervision, learning control rather than hiding or being punished. These ideas were met with resistance from some and cautious optimism from others. It would be a long road to change, but Jarvan felt it was a road worth walking, even if he would not see its end in his lifetime. To him, leadership was stewardship. He would plant seeds of a better future, knowing others would see them blossom. As the months turned to years, Jarvan found solace not only in policy and politics, but also in simple moments. He visited the families of soldiers who had fallen, sitting with them in their grief, sharing memories of their loved ones. He spent afternoons in the stables, grooming his horse, feeling the warmth of the animal's breath. He joined festivals in small towns, tasting bread baked with herbs and dancing to music played on lutes and drums. He helped a child hoist a kite into the wind and laughed when it dipped before catching the breeze. These moments reminded him that beyond the marble halls and the weighty decisions, life was made of everyday joys and sorrows. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, Jarvan climbed to the highest tower of the castle. From there, he could see the entirety of the great city spreading out like a tapestry. He could see the river glinting like a ribbon of silver, the rooftops glowing in the fading light, the far-off fields darkening into shadow. He thought of his ancestors, of the line of kings and queens who had stood where he now stood. He thought of the choices they had made, the victories and mistakes woven together to create the world he inherited. He realized that, like them, he would be remembered not for the crown he wore, but for the way he held it. He whispered a promise into the breeze, a promise to lead with courage and compassion, to listen as well as command, to protect not only the strong, but also the vulnerable. The night deepened, and stars began to prick the sky. Jarvan remained at the tower, watching as lights appeared in windows below. Each flame represented a life, a story. He let the sight settle into him like a lullaby. In that quiet, he understood that though he had faced battles and loss, though he had seen his father die and his city burn, though he had been praised and questioned in equal measure, the thread that ran through his life was the love he held for his people. It was not a love born of grandeur, but of a simple desire to see them safe and at peace. Dear sleepy summoner, as this tale winds slowly to a close, remember that Jarvan IV's story is far from over. He still walks the halls of his city, still rides through forests and over mountains, still sits in meditation, seeking the right path. His journey is one of constant learning and gentle strength. Like all of us, he is shaped by those who walk beside him, by friends like Garen, who remind him of loyalty, by mentors like Shinjao, who teach patience, by companions like Shaivana, who embody courage, and even by adversaries who force him to examine his beliefs. In your own life, you may find echoes of his path, moments where duty and compassion intertwine, where the right choice is not clear, and where listening is just as important as speaking. Let the steady rhythm of Jarvan's story lull you now. Picture him walking through the quiet corridors of his home, pausing to lay a hand on a cold stone column. Imagine the rustle of leaves in the breezes that pass over Demacia's fields, the murmur of voices in a marketplace at dawn, the stillness of a watchtower as dawn breaks and the first bird sings. These sounds are like a gentle heartbeat, grounding and calm. Close your eyes and breathe with them. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders as you join Jarvan in this moment of peace. The future will unfold as it will. For now, there is rest. As you sink deeper into relaxation, there is more to share about Jarvan IV's journey. His childhood was filled with moments of wonder that would shape his spirit long before he set foot on any battlefield. Within the stone walls of the palace, there existed hidden gardens that his mother had designed years before he was born. Though she did not live to see her son play among the fragrant blossoms, the echoes of her care remained. At times when lessons became too heavy and expectations pressed too tightly, young Jarvan would slip through a narrow archway draped in ivy to wander among beds of lavender and jasmine. A small fountain stood at the garden's center, its water sparkling in the sunlight as it cascaded over smooth stones. Sitting by the fountain, Jarvan would trace patterns in the water's surface and imagine that the ripples carried his questions out into the world. He wondered what his mother might have whispered to him had she lived, whether she would have told him stories of her own childhood, whether she would have sung him lullabies to help him sleep. In those quiet moments, he felt her presence in the warmth of the sun and the gentle fragrance of blossoms. The gardeners who tended the space told him that Lady Catherine had loved the sound of wind chimes and so hung delicate bells among the branches. When they tinkled softly, he imagined her laughter and felt a small smile lift his lips. Bards and storytellers visited the palace regularly, bringing with them tales from beyond Demacia. Jarvan listened with rapt attention as these travelers shared myths of ancient Freljordian iceborne warriors and of vast deserts where sandstorms whispered secrets. His favorite stories, though, were those of heroes who chose mercy over might. One evening, an old storyteller from Piltover spoke of a merchant who spared his enemy and, in doing so, gained a friend. The tale stayed with Jarvan long after the bard had departed, shaping his belief that kindness could be as powerful as any weapon. He began to collect small objects that reminded him of these stories, a smooth stone from the garden representing steadiness, a feather dropped by a passing bird symbolizing freedom, and a strand of blue ribbon given to him by a seamstress as a token of gratitude when he praised her work. These tokens he kept in a carved wooden box, returning to them when doubt clouded his mind. Each one anchored him to a lesson learned, a value treasured. As he grew, Jarvan spent many afternoons exploring the hidden corners of the palace library. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, filled with scrolls and books that smelled of leather and ink. Candles flickered in wrought iron holders, casting dancing shadows on the spines. Jarvan ran his fingers along titles etched in gold, selecting works that piqued his curiosity. He read histories of Runeterra's many regions, studying the customs of Ionia, the technologies of Piltover, the resilience of the Freljord. He learned about the cataclysmic wars of ancient Shurima and the ascension rituals that transformed mortals into demigods. Though Demacia held firm to its traditions, Jarvan's mind stretched outward through these stories, fostering empathy and a sense of connection beyond his homeland. He copied passages that inspired him and tucked them into his journal. In the margin of one page, he wrote, "A ruler cannot lead without understanding the world." The library became a sanctuary, not only of knowledge, but of imagination, where his dreams took shape among whispered pages and golden light. Garen's friendship continued to anchor Jarvan throughout adolescence. They were two sides of a coin, each strong where the other felt uncertain. When Jarvan wrestled with the abstract complexities of law and justice, Garen saw a straight path of honor. When Garen grappled with feelings of doubt hidden beneath his stoic exterior, Jarvan offered thoughtful questions that helped him see different angles. Together, they attended festivals in the city, blending into crowds to watch jesters perform and acrobats leap. They shared loaves of sweet bread bought from market vendors and laughed until their sides ached at puppet shows depicting exaggerated versions of Demacian heroes. On nights when the weight of his future unsettled him, Jarvan found solace in the fact that Garen never saw him as a prince first, but as a friend. In turn, Jarvan admired Garen's unwavering loyalty to the crown and to the ideals of Demacia. Their bond became a living testament to the fact that leadership cannot be shouldered alone. It is sustained by trust and shared experience. Xinjiao's lessons extended beyond martial training and philosophical anecdotes. He introduced Jarvan to the art of tea ceremonies, emphasizing the value of mindfulness in everyday actions. On days when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden rays through the palace windows, Xinjiao would invite Jarvan to sit quietly. They would heat water over a small flame, the kettle's gentle whistle becoming a cue to breathe deeply. Xinjiao poured the hot water over leaves, the scent of jasmine or green tea unfurling in the air. He explained that even mundane tasks could be done with care and presence, that one could learn much from the way water flows and steam rises. Jarvan, often so focused on large-scale strategies and weighty decisions, found comfort in the simple act of cradling a warm cup between his hands. He learned that tranquility could be cultivated, not just found. The patience he gained during these ceremonies helped him later to remain calm in the face of chaos. On another occasion, Xinjiao took Jarvan beyond the palace walls to visit a small settlement at the edge of a forest. The villagers welcomed them with warm smiles and curious glances. There, Xinjiao introduced Jarvan to an elderly herbalist who lived in a cottage draped with drying herbs. The herbalist's hands were calloused and stained from years of tending to plants, and her eyes twinkled with mischief as she described the properties of each leaf and flower. She taught Jarvan how to recognize medicinal plants and which roots could ease pain or calm fever. She spoke of the interdependence of all living things and the importance of respecting the balance of nature. Jarvan listened, fascinated. He realized that caring for a kingdom meant caring for the health of its land and its people. The herbalist pressed a small satchel of dried chamomile into his hands as he left, telling him to brew it when he needed to sleep. Later, as he inhaled the tea's gentle aroma, he remembered the softness of her voice and the wisdom in her wrinkles. When Jarvan was still in his teens, King Jarvan III invited him to accompany him on a diplomatic visit to a coastal port town. This journey was not a military campaign, but a foray into understanding commerce and trade. Jarvan's senses were assaulted by new sights and sounds: the salty tang of the sea breeze, the creak of ships' rigging, the cries of gulls circling overhead. He marveled at the size of the vessels, their sails billowing like clouds against the blue sky. Merchants from foreign lands displayed goods from across Rune Terra, vibrant fabrics from Bilgewater, delicate glasswork from Piltover, fish dried and spiced in ways he had never tasted. At the docks, he watched sailors unload crates, their tattoos telling stories of distant voyages. Some recognized him and offered respectful nods, while others simply regarded him as another customer. In an open-air market, he spoke with a woman selling seashell jewelry. She told him about the shifting tides and how the phases of the moon affected the catch. Listening to her, Jarvan felt the threads of connection between Demacia's inland wheatfields and its coastal harbours. From the port town, father and son travelled inland to a monastery perched on a hillside. The monks there maintained the archives of Demacian law and philosophy. They greeted the royal entourage with quiet bows, their simple robes a contrast to the soldiers' gleaming armor. In the cool, dark halls, lined with stone columns, Jarvan spoke with a monk whose bare feet whispered against the flagstones. This monk, Brother Thaddeus, had served as an advisor to previous kings. He had a habit of pausing for long stretches before answering, considering his words carefully. A wise leader knows when to act swiftly and when to sit with uncertainty. Brother Thaddeus told Jarvan, his voice echoing softly. Do not fear not knowing. Fear only the refusal to learn. Jarvan carried these words with him for years. They became a mantra in moments when he felt pressure to make immediate decisions without adequate counsel. The monastery visit impressed upon him the value of reflection and the weight that history could play in guiding the present. The night before Jarvan first faced the Argoth swarms, he could not sleep. The air inside the command tent was thick with anticipation. Lantern light flickered on maps spread across the table, and the voices of soldiers murmured outside. Jarvan stepped into the cool night air, drawing his cloak around his shoulders. Stars glittered above, unmoved by the turmoil brewing below. He walked to the edge of camp, where the grass rolled away into darkness. There he met a young recruit named Elias standing watch. Elias had not yet seen a real battle. His hands trembled slightly on his spear. Jarvan approached and stood beside him, not as a prince, but as another man watching the night. "Are you afraid?" Jarvan asked softly. Elias swallowed and nodded. "Yes, my lord," he whispered. Jarvan smiled gently. "So am I," he admitted. Elias looked up, surprised. Jarvan continued, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite it." He shared with Elias a story he had learned from a Piltover merchant about a captain who sailed through storms by keeping his eyes on a fixed star. Jarvan pointed to the North Star above them. "When your heart races tomorrow, find something steady to focus on," he advised. "A friend's voice, the feel of the ground beneath your feet. You will get through it." Elias nodded, his grip on his spear firming. The conversation anchored Jarvan too. Speaking his fears allowed him to feel them without being ruled by them. As dawn approached on the day of battle, a thick fog hung low over the valley. Drops of moisture clung to blades of grass, sparkling when touched by the first rays of sunlight. The silence was punctuated by the occasional cough of a soldier clearing his throat or the gentle whicker of a horse. Jarvan stood at the front lines, inhaling the damp, cool air. He could feel the anticipation in his own muscles, the energy gathering like the tension before a storm. When the Argoth appeared, they seemed at first like a shadow creeping across the ground. Their numbers were staggering, a living carpet of ebony bodies weaving together in unison. The strategy Jarvan had devised had been rehearsed in his mind 100 times, but seeing the enemy in motion sent a thrill of fear through him. He remembered Xinjiao's teachings and forced himself to focus on each breath, counting slowly. The world narrowed to the immediate tasks, signaling the flanks, keeping an eye on Garen's movements, listening for the thunder of hooves. The battle progressed slowly at first, then rapidly. The Argoth swarmed as expected, undulating like a single organism. Garen's unit drew them towards the narrow pass, their shouts echoing off the rocks. Jarvan's own unit skirted the forest's edge, hooves muffled by fallen leaves. He noted the way sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shafts of gold that cut through shadow. When they reached the clearing where the queen stood, he saw her in sharper detail, smaller than the others in stature, but pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to hold the entire swarm together. Her eyes were like polished obsidian. In the moment he charged, time seemed to slow. He felt the weight of his lance, the vibration of his horse's stride. The world blurred except for his target. When the queen fell, a ripple of disorientation moved through the Argoth ranks. They scattered, their cohesion dissolved. Later, when Jarvan thought back on the battle, he remembered less the clash of arms and more the sense of purpose that had guided him. He remembered the way dew sparkled on his gauntlet and the feel of cool wind on his face. These small sensory details anchored him to the experience, allowing him to process it without being consumed by it. After the victory, when even More's villagers gathered around the soldiers, Jarvan noticed a little girl hiding behind her mother's skirts. Her wide eyes peered up at him, curious and a little afraid. He crouched down so that he was at eye level with her and smiled gently. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena," she whispered. He extended his hand, and she reached out slowly, placing a small carved figure of a bird into his palm. "My grandfather made this," she said shyly. "It keeps us safe." Jarvan closed his fingers around the wooden token, feeling its smooth surface. "Thank you, Lena," he said. "I will carry it with me." He kept his promise, tucking the bird into a pouch near his heart. Whenever doubt flickered within him, he would hold the token and remember Lena's trusting eyes and the simple kindness of a child sharing something precious. It reminded him that even in the midst of grand campaigns, individual lives mattered deeply. During the Noxian campaign, the landscapes Jarvan traversed varied from rolling hills to barren plains scarred by past conflicts. In one village, reduced to ashes, he found a lone elder sitting on a charred stump, staring at the ruins of his home. The man's skin was weathered, his beard white, his eyes glassy with shock. Jarvan dismounted and approached slowly, mindful of the man's grief. He crouched beside him and offered a canteen of water. The elder took a sip, hands shaking. "They came at night," the old man murmured. "We had no time to gather our belongings. My wife—" His voice cracked, and he fell silent. Jarvan listened, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. He did not offer empty reassurances. Instead, he sat with him for a while, sharing the weight of loss. Before he left, Jarvan ordered his men to help bury the dead and rebuild what they could. He knew that acts of compassion were as crucial as any military victory. He also realized that on the opposite side, soldiers fought under orders, believing in their own cause. This awareness complicated his view of conflict. He began to wonder what circumstances might have led Noxian youths to pick up weapons. He kept these musings to himself, but they influenced his later decisions, encouraging him to seek resolution through diplomacy when possible. As the days of marching wore on, Jarvan developed the habit of writing letters each night by the campfire. He wrote to his father, describing not only the strategic movements of troops, but also the sights that moved him, the way sunlight broke through storm clouds, the laughter of soldiers sharing stories, the smell of pine needles crushed underfoot. He wrote of his concerns about the Meiji Seekers' increasing zeal and the fear he saw in the eyes of those whose only crime was an innate connection to magic. Writing allowed him to crystallize his thoughts and feelings. Though his father might not respond to every letter, the act of writing felt like a conversation, a tether to home. Years later, when Jarvan read through these letters, he saw his own growth mirrored in the inked lines. He saw how his youthful certainty had softened into nuanced understanding. He saw the seeds of the reforms he would later pursue. When Jarvan and his men were ambushed and forced to retreat through the forest, the days blurred into one another. Hunger and fatigue pressed down like heavy cloaks. The forest itself seemed alive, its branches twisting into shapes that resembled watchful eyes. The sound of distant water and the rustle of leaves became a lullaby and a warning. At night, they slept under a canopy of stars, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Jarvan's side throbbed where the arrow had struck, but he refused to show weakness. In the darkness, his mind wandered. He thought of his mother's garden, of the herbalist's chamomile tea, of the stories he had heard as a boy. He thought of the old Freljordian tale of a warrior who found a spirit of the forest while lost in the snow. The spirit had offered him a single berry that sustained him long enough to find his way. Jarvan smiled faintly at the memory. Though no spirits appeared to him, he found nourishment in his companion's determination and in his own will to survive. Each morning he would stand, even if his vision swam, and whisper to himself that he could take one more step. Shyvana's presence during Jarvan's recovery was more than a physical act of carrying him to safety. It was the beginning of a friendship that transcended differences in species and background. Lying in the castle at Renwall, wrapped in blankets, Jarvan listened as Shyvana spoke in low tones about the cave where she had been born. She described the smell of molten rock, the way the light played off her mother's scales, the sharpness of the air high in the mountains. She spoke of the first time she shifted between her human and draconic forms, and the confusion that followed when she realized she belonged fully to neither world. Jarvan shared with her his memories of growing up in a palace with expectations layered over his existence. They both understood what it meant to straddle two worlds, Shyvana between dragon and human, Jarvan between man and symbol. Their conversations were punctuated by comfortable silences, during which they simply existed in one another's company, the crackle of the fire filling the space. When Jarvan was well enough to walk, Shyvana offered to teach him a breathing technique she used to control the fire within her. They stood in the castle courtyard at dawn, the air cool. She demonstrated, inhaling slowly, then exhaling, imagining a flickering flame diminishing. Jarvan imitated her, finding that focusing on his breath calmed his racing thoughts. This technique would aid him in later years when political debates raged and emotions surged. The battle with Eva was not only a physical confrontation, it was also a clash of identities. Shyvana faced her mother, a creature of pure instinct and rage, while Jarvan faced his own limitations. The sky darkened as Eva approached, clouds boiling with the heat of her presence. Lightning flickered within the smoke, illuminating the dragon's vast wings. The ground trembled beneath the weight of her landing. When Shyvana took to the air, her movements were fluid, a blend of human agility and dragon power. Jarvan watched, heart pounding, knowing he could not join her in the sky, yet determined to do what he could on the ground. He directed archers to aim not at the dragon's heart, but at its wings, hoping to slow it. He instructed healers to stand ready with herbs soaked in ice water to soothe burns. He barked orders to the garrison to remain focused, to remember that terror could be faced. At one point, when Eva's fiery breath scorched the ramparts, a soldier froze, his eyes wide. Jarvan placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "See beyond the flames. See your home behind you." The soldier swallowed, nodded, and returned to his post. After Eva fell, Jarvan felt no triumph, only relief and a deep respect for Shyvana. They had both faced pieces of themselves and emerged with greater clarity. On the journey back to Demacia, Jarvan often rode side by side with Shyvana. They travelled slowly, allowing time for word of their approach to spread so that communities could prepare a welcome or seek assistance. In one village, an elderly musician played a song on a lute that he claimed had been composed during the founding of Demacia. The melody was simple, its notes lingering in the air like the scent of baking bread. Jarvan listened, closing his eyes, feeling each chord resonate in his chest. "We used to sing this song when we were children," the musician said. "It reminds us of who we are." Jarvan realized that songs and stories are anchors for a culture, carrying memories through time. He asked the musician to teach him the lyrics. Around a fire that night, he and Shyvana sang the song softly with the villagers, their voices blending. In another settlement, a young boy approached Shyvana timidly and offered her a garland of wildflowers. She hesitated, uncertain of how to respond to such open acceptance. Jarvan smiled and helped drape the flowers over her shoulders. The boy beamed. Moments like these nourished Jarvan's faith in his people's capacity for kindness. Returning to the great city with the dragon's skull and Shyvana at his side forced Jarvan to confront the complexities of Demacian society. Within the palace, he found factions forming subtle alliances. Some nobles feared that acknowledging Shyvana would open the door to more outsiders with powers they did not fully understand. Others saw her as a symbol of Demacia's strength and adaptability. Jarvan navigated these opinions carefully, listening without allowing them to sway his own sense of right. He understood that fear often masqueraded as prudence. In a council meeting, a noble suggested that Shyvana be kept under constant watch. Jarvan responded calmly, "Trust is built by extending it." He spoke of Shyvana's bravery, of the lives she had saved. He reminded the council that Demacia's strength had always come from unity and courage, not suspicion. Over time, some hearts softened. They saw Shaivana training soldiers with patience and ferocity, saw her laugh with children in the courtyard, saw her sit quietly in the garden, tending to the roses. Still, acceptance was not universal. Jarvan learned that progress is often uneven, a slow river carving a path through rock. As tensions regarding magic grew, Jarvan took it upon himself to learn more about the Mage Seeker Order. He visited their headquarters, a stern building of grey stone carved with the image of petricite chains. Inside, the air was cool and still. He walked through halls lined with cells, each containing a person whose only transgression was an ability they had never asked for. Some prisoners glared at him with anger, others stared blankly, their spirits seeming crushed. He spoke with them, learned their names, listened to their stories. One young woman named Mira told him she had accidentally set her kitchen ablaze. While cooking, her panic igniting the latent magic she had never known she possessed. Her neighbors had turned her over without allowing her to explain. Jarvan's heart clenched. He realized the system he had defended was broken. He spoke to the Magi Seeker guards, many of whom believed wholeheartedly that they were protecting Demacia. He saw that fear had built walls within walls. Jarvan's visits were not limited to prisons. He travelled to the quarries where Petricites was mined, vast wounds in the earth where men swung pickaxes and dust hung in the air. Petricite, a stone that dampened magic, had become the foundation of Demacia's anti-magical policies. Jarvan walked among the miners, feeling the rough texture of uncut stones beneath his fingers. He watched as workers hauled slabs into carts. The stone's dull, soothing effect on his own senses surprised him. It was as if the magic of the world receded slightly, leaving space for thought. He understood its allure. Yet he also saw the toll that constant exposure took on the miners' tired eyes, hunched backs, coughs that did not fade. He spoke with them about their work, thanked them for their contributions, and made note of their concerns. He wondered whether reliance on petricite had made Demacia complacent, trusting the stone to solve problems that required empathy and understanding. In the months leading up to the rebellion, Jarvan noticed an increase in whispers. Servants shared news of mages being harassed in markets. Letters arrived anonymously at the palace, pleading for intervention. A nobleman's daughter quietly confessed to him that she could make plants bloom with a touch, but that she had hidden this gift all her life. Jarvan arranged for her to meet with scholars who could help her learn control in secret. He began to host small, informal gatherings at the palace where individuals with magic could speak openly about their experiences under the watchful eyes of trusted guards. He listened as a father described the fear of raising a child whose laughter occasionally sent sparks flying. He listened as a young man spoke of learning to contain his power by imagining himself as a vessel, channeling energy instead of suppressing it. These stories deepened his understanding. Yet, for every story he heard, there were dozens more he did not. Silas's uprising did not spring from nowhere. It was the culmination of years of pain. In hindsight, Jarvan wished he had done more, reached further, spoken louder. He learned that remorse can be a teacher if one allows it. When news of the rebellion reached Jarvan during his inspection tour, he felt as though the ground shifted beneath him. He had always believed the palace was a sanctuary beyond reach. The image of walls breached from within unsettled him profoundly. The ride back to the capital was charged with tension. Soldiers rode with their jaws set, determination etched onto their faces. The horses sensed their riders' urgency and pushed themselves harder. At night, when they were forced to rest briefly, Jarvan lay staring at the stars, feeling the weight of not knowing. Each mile seemed to stretch, time elongating. He whispered prayers to the spirits of his ancestors, asking them to watch over his father. In the darkness, he remembered Brother Thaddeus's words about uncertainty, reminding himself to accept the unknown until it revealed itself. Dawn after dawn, they pressed on until the city's towers emerged on the horizon, smoke plumes curling above them. The sight spurred the company to push harder, hearts pounding. The hours inside the besieged capital passed in a blur of fire and noise. Jarvan moved through chaos with a focus honed by years of training and recent battles. He led squads to secure intersections, directed healers to treat the wounded regardless of allegiance, and sought to minimize bloodshed. When he found his father lifeless, the grief that struck him was both immediate and delayed. There was no time to mourn fully. There were still fires to extinguish and lives to save. He compartmentalized his anguish, tucking it away while he addressed immediate threats. Only later, when the rebels had been driven out and the flames doused, could he return to the throne room and kneel beside his father once more. In the quiet, he allowed himself to weep. Shyvana placed a hand on his shoulder, her silent presence communicating solidarity. Garen stood nearby, eyes moist but posture unwavering. Lux, her usually bright demeanor dimmed, offered him a handkerchief embroidered with the Crown Guard crest. These acts of support formed a net that kept Jarvan from falling into the abyss of despair. The funeral for King Jarvan III was a solemn affair, attended by citizens from all corners of Demacia. Thousands lined the streets to watch the procession. The king's body was carried on a bier draped in white cloth, a crown of simple oak leaves resting upon it. Jarvan, dressed in ceremonial armor polished to a mirror sheen, walked behind, head bowed. High priests intoned ancient prayers, their voices rising like smoke. Shyvana walked among them, her purple skin a striking contrast against the white robes. As they passed through the city, flowers were tossed onto the path, petals scattering like tears. Jarvan kept his gaze forward, focusing on the rhythm of his steps, the sound of the priests' voices, the murmur of the crowd. When they reached the royal mausoleum, carved from the same stone that formed the palace, Jarvan watched as his father's coffin was lowered into its resting place. He felt the finality of the moment settle over him like a heavy cloak. Later, in a speech to the people, he honored his father's service and acknowledged the pain of the rebellion. He called for unity and promised to seek paths that would heal rather than divide. Following the funeral, Jarvan sought to understand the root causes of the rebellion from those who had participated. He met in private with former rebels who had accepted his offer of amnesty. Some came willingly, others were compelled by circumstances. They spoke of being arrested without trial, of watching family members dragged away, of feeling invisible in a system that did not hear them. Jarvan listened without defensiveness. He asked questions, not to catch them in contradictions, but to learn. In some cases, he apologized on behalf of the crown. In others, he challenged assumptions and corrected misinformation. He recognized that grievances are rarely one-dimensional. He left these meetings with pages of notes and a renewed determination to reform the Magiseeker order. He created a council that included both nobles and commoners, mages and those without magic, to advise him on new policies. It was an unprecedented move that met resistance, but he held firm. He believed that to govern fairly, one must hear from all affected. In his private moments, Jarvan found himself returning again and again to the question of what kind of leader he wished to be. He reread the journals of his ancestors, noting the choices they had made and the outcomes that followed. He pored over the writings of philosophers, both Demacian and from beyond, seeking wisdom in their words. He spent long hours with Tiana Crownguard, whose blunt honesty sometimes stung but always clarified. She reminded him that leadership was not about pleasing everyone, but about making decisions rooted in the well-being of the whole. She also encouraged him to take time for himself. An empty cup cannot fill another, she said. Jarvan took this to heart. He resumed his meditation practice with renewed dedication, spending time each dawn sitting cross-legged on a cushion, breathing with intention, watching thoughts come and go like clouds. When Shyvana eventually chose to leave Demacia to explore her own path, Jarvan supported her decision, though the loss weighed on him. He walked with her to the edge of the city, the early morning air cool. They did not speak much. Words were inadequate to capture the depth of their connection. At the gates, Shyvana turned to him. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, "and thank you for allowing me the freedom to find myself." Jarvan nodded, his throat tight. "You have always been free," he replied. "I hope Demacia will one day be worthy of your return." They embraced briefly, wings wrapping around his shoulders. Watching her silhouette diminish as she walked away, he felt both sadness and pride. He hoped the world would treat her with kindness. Her departure reminded him that relationships are living things that must sometimes stretch to endure. Over the years, Jarvan continued to travel beyond the borders of his kingdom, not always with armies, but sometimes with small entourages or even in disguise. In Ionia, he met with scholars of the Kinku, who spoke of balance and the twin necessities of change and stability. They welcomed him into their temple, its paper walls painted with landscapes. He walked through bamboo groves, listening to the rustle of leaves like rain. He learned of rituals where Ionian communities honored the spirits of those who had come before, not by building grand monuments, but by tending to shrines set beside streams and under trees. He participated quietly, lighting incense for his father and feeling the smoke curl around his fingers. In Piltover, he observed the bustling energy of inventors and traders. He marveled at Hextech devices that hummed with innovation. He spoke with a young engineer whose eyes gleamed as she described a device that could harness the power of the wind. Jarvan asked how such inventions were governed. She laughed and said that in her city, ideas were given room to grow before restrictions were considered. These experiences broadened his mind and reinforced his belief that Demacia could adapt without losing its core identity. Returning home after these travels, Jarvan often spent evenings sitting by the fireplace in the room that had once been his nursery. The portraits on the walls looked down upon him, the serene gaze of his mother, the resolute profile of his father, the stern faces of long-dead ancestors. He spoke aloud to them sometimes, voicing his fears and hopes. "I am trying," he would say quietly. I cannot promise that I will always be right, but I can promise that I will always care. The flicker of flames cast their faces into motion, making the painted eyes seem almost alive. Though they did not speak, he felt comforted by their presence. He liked to imagine that his mother's spirit smiled when he made choices guided by compassion, and that his father nodded in approval when he stood firm on matters of principle. Seasons turned. Winters brought soft blankets of snow over the great city, muffling sounds and painting the stone rooftops white. Jarvan would walk through the courtyard, breath-forming puffs of mist, listening to the crunch of snow underfoot. He remembered sledding down hills with Garen when they were young, faces flushed, laughter echoing across the fields. In spring, crocuses pushed through the thawing ground, small bursts of purple and yellow promising renewal. Jarvan would pause to admire them, sometimes bending to touch their delicate petals. In summer, the heat radiated off the city's stone walls, and the market brimmed with fresh fruits and fragrant herbs. Children ran through fountains, squealing as water splashed. Jarvan's heart lifted at their carefree joy. In autumn, leaves turned gold and crimson, swirling in the wind. Jarvan would ride out to the edges of the kingdom, watching farmers bring in the harvest, their hands stained from grape juice and earth. Each season offered lessons: the patience of winter, the hope of spring, the energy of summer, the gratitude of autumn. He saw in nature a mirror of the cycles within his own life. Though he had not yet formally taken the crown, Jarvan held more responsibility than he had ever imagined. Decisions came, daily disputes to adjudicate, resources to allocate, borders to secure. He developed a routine to help manage the pace. Each morning began with quiet reflection and a simple breakfast. Mid-morning brought meetings with council members. He made a point to include at least one person in each meeting whose background differed from his own, whether a merchant, a farmer, or a mage. Hearing diverse perspectives prevented him from becoming trapped in a single viewpoint. Afternoons were often spent reviewing reports from scouts and generals, or visiting construction sites for new schools and hospitals. He insisted on transparency in the funding of these projects, knowing that sunlight is a powerful disinfectant against corruption. In the evening, he took walks through the city incognito when possible, cloaked and accompanied only by a few trusted guards. He listened to people speak freely in taverns and markets, learning what rumors circulated and what fears simmered. He used this knowledge to inform his policies. As Jarvan aged, subtle lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, the result of years spent squinting into sun and wind. Streaks of silver threaded through his dark hair. The weight of grief softened into a deep, abiding love for his father, rather than the sharp pain it had once been. He maintained his physical training, adjusting as his body changed, focusing more on agility and endurance than brute strength. He took up writing poetry in moments of solitude, capturing images that struck him. The way light glanced off a shield during parade practice, the sigh of wind through wheat, the quiet dignity of a mason smoothing mortar. He shared these poems only with a select few, finding in the act of writing a private joy. Sometimes, when he sat down to compose, words flowed easily like clear water. Other times, they came slowly, but he enjoyed the challenge. Art, he discovered, offered a different form of power, the power to connect through emotion. Throughout all these years, Jarvan never lost his appreciation for the small tokens he had collected as a child. The smooth stone from the garden, now worn from years of handling, still sat in his pocket. He would roll it between his fingers during tense meetings, grounding himself. The feather, though faded, reminded him of the freedom he sought for all of Demacia's people. The blue ribbon had frayed, but he kept it tucked in his journal as a reminder that gratitude can be expressed with simple gestures. He added new tokens over time: a dried chamomile blossom from the herbalist's cottage, a scrap of parchment with Brother Thaddeus's handwriting, a carved figurine of a dragon given to him by Shyvana before she left. These objects served as a tangible thread connecting the chapters of his life. Holding them, he could trace the arc of his journey, see how each lesson built upon the last, how each relationship shaped his understanding of what it means to lead. Jarvan often envisioned the future of Demacia not as a fixed monument, but as a living tree. Its roots were the values instilled by his ancestors: honor, duty, courage. Its trunk was the collective strength of its people, supporting one another through seasons of plenty and drought. Its branches reached outward, seeking sunlight, representing the kingdom's openness to new ideas and alliances. Its leaves were the individual lives and dreams of farmers, merchants, scholars, soldiers, and mages. Some leaves would fall, returning nutrients to the soil. New ones would grow in their place. When storms came, the tree would bend, not break, because it was flexible yet rooted. Jarvan's role, as he saw it, was to nurture the tree, to water it with compassion and prune away what threatened its health. He did not see himself as the tree, but as the gardener who cared for it. This vision guided him through dark moments, reminding him that leadership was an act of service, not a pursuit of personal glory. And so the story of Jarvan IV continues, stretching out like the branches of that tree into a future woven with possibilities. The man who once stood as a boy in a hidden garden listening to wind chimes now stands at the helm of a nation, his hands calloused from both sword and plough. He carries with him the voices of those who came before, the teachings of mentors and friends, the hopes of farmers and mages, the lessons drawn from victories and mistakes. He understands that there is no final answer to the questions he asks, only an ongoing practice of listening, adjusting, and choosing with care. In your own quiet moments, dear sleepy summoner, you might find inspiration in his path. You might remember that the journeys of heroes are not measured solely by the battles they fight, but by the tenderness with which they hold the hearts of those they serve. Now, as the night deepens and the stars wheel slowly overhead, imagine Jarvan sitting once more by his mother's fountain. The water still flows, ripples catching the moonlight. He dips his hand into the cool liquid, feeling it glide over his skin. He hears the faint chiming of bells in the breeze and smiles, thinking of the woman whose love still lingers in the garden she designed. He closes his eyes and takes a slow breath. The scent of jasmine fills the air. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl hoots. Nearby, a guard shifts his weight. Life continues in all its quiet rhythms. And in this moment, Jarvan is simply a son, a friend, a leader seeking peace. Let that image accompany you into sleep, an image of perseverance, of compassion, of rest within responsibility. May your dreams be filled with gentle winds, steady foundations, and the knowledge that even those who carry great burdens find solace in moments of tranquility. Sleep well, sleepy summoner, wrapped wrapped in the calm embrace of a world built upon honorable hearts. Yet the tapestry of Jarvan's life still holds more threads, weaving in moments both quiet and profound that reveal even deeper shades of his character and of the world he sought to shape. In the rugged northern reaches of Demacia, far from the bustling heart of the great city, shepherds led flocks of goats along steep trails carved into mountainsides. The air there was thin and crisp, scented with pine and the sharp tang of rock. Jarvan made a point to visit these remote communities, riding on narrow paths that clung to cliffs, feeling the wind whip against his face. In one such village, he was welcomed into a circular stone house where a family had prepared a simple meal of cheese and herbs. As they ate around a low wooden table, Jarvan listened to their stories of surviving winters when snow closed off the pass for months at a time. After dinner, he stepped outside and looked up at a sky so clear that stars seemed close enough to touch. There were no torches to dim their light, no walls to obstruct the view, only a vast expanse of glittering constellations. The village elder, a woman with hair as white as snow, pointed out shapes in the stars and recited the old names of their patterns. She spoke of ancestors who navigated by these lights and found their way home. Jarvan thought about how the same stars shone above the palace, above the Argoth valley, above the forest where he had nearly died. He realized that while the circumstances of people's lives varied, they all looked up at the same sky. This thought comforted him. Before leaving the village, he promised to send supplies to repair their stone bridge before the next thaw. The villagers pressed pouches of dried herbs into his hands, gifts of gratitude that he accepted with a deep bow. On another journey, Jarvan arrived just as a child was being born in a small town. The healer had summoned aid, for the birth was proving difficult. Without the hesitation, Jarvan offered whatever help he could. He fetched water and clean linens, his armor forgotten in the corner. He held the mother's hand as she labored, murmuring words of encouragement he had heard Shin Jiao speak to soldiers in pain. He glanced at the father, whose face was pale with fear and hope, and squeezed his shoulder. When the child finally emerged, wailing and pink, Jarvan felt tears sting his eyes. The healer placed the baby in his arms for a brief moment, and Jarvan marveled at the tiny fingers curling around his thumb. In that instant, the weight of his responsibilities and the noise of politics seemed to fade. He thought of his own mother, who had never held him, and made a silent promise that every decision he made would consider the lives of children like this one. The parents named their daughter Catherine, a name that echoed with his mother's memory. Jarvan left that town with a newfound resolve to ensure that his kingdom was a place where new life was welcomed with hope rather than fear. Back in the capital, Jarvan's work crafting new laws required not only empathy, but also skillful negotiation. The council chamber was often filled with heated debate as nobles defended their privileges, merchants argued for fair trade, and representatives of commoners called for justice. Jarvan learned to navigate these currents with a calm demeanor, drawing upon the patience he had cultivated. He would listen to each argument fully before speaking. When he did speak, he drew upon analogies from his travels, a bridge that needed reinforcement, a tree that required pruning and watering, a river that would flood if dammed too tightly. These images helped others envision the consequences of their choices. He also shared wisdom he had learned from other cultures. reciting Ionian proverbs that emphasized balance and Piltovian sayings about innovation. Sometimes he wrote his points down in letters delivered ahead of council meetings, giving nobles time to contemplate rather than react. In drafting reforms to the Meiji Seeker order, he insisted on transparency and oversight. He proposed that representatives of those with magical abilities be included in the governing council, an idea that caused murmurs of shock. Fear grows in darkness, he reminded them. Let us bring these discussions into the light. Slowly, through patience and persistence, he built consensus. Though not all were pleased, enough understood that change was necessary to prevent further unrest. Jarvan's sense of duty extended deeply into caring for those who had paid the ultimate price for the realm's safety. Often, after conflicts, he would visit the burial sites where soldiers were laid to rest. Rows of simple markers dotted the fields, each bearing a name and the crest of a unit. Jarvan would kneel before each row, fingers tracing the carved letters. He whispered each name, honoring the individuality of each person. He wrote personal letters to the families of those who had fallen, sharing memories of their loved ones' bravery and kindness. He recounted small details he had observed, a laugh that lifted spirits around the campfire, a quiet act of generosity when rations were low. His words could not lessen their loss, but they offered a connection, a recognition that their grief was seen. Jarvan established funds to ensure that widows and children received support. He understood that the cost of war did not end when the last sword was sheathed. At memorial services, he spoke not of glory, but of the everyday courage of those who had held the line so others could live. Standing in the cold, hearing the sobs of a mother burying her son, he reaffirmed his commitment to avoid war whenever possible and to make each battle fought count for something greater than conquest. The new generation of soldiers who trained under Jarvan learned as much about compassion as they did about combat. He would often join drills unexpectedly, his mere presence causing recruits to straighten their posture and sharpen their focus. After observing their forms and offering corrections, he would gather them under a shady tree and tell them stories. He spoke of the battle against the Argoth, emphasizing not the victory, but the strategy born of protecting civilians. He told them about the forest retreat, describing how courage sometimes meant knowing when to withdraw. He recounted the dragon attack, focusing on the unity between those with and without magic. He cautioned against cruelty, recounting how unnecessary brutality had driven people into Silas's arms. He reminded them that they wielded swords not to aggrandize themselves, but to defend those who could not defend themselves. The recruits listened, eyes wide, absorbing more than techniques. Jarvan encouraged them to volunteer in the city during downtime, helping build walls, serving food at shelters, or teaching children to read. Many returned to training with a renewed understanding of why they had chosen to serve. The military under Jarvan's influence began to reflect not only Demacia's strength, but also its capacity for mercy. Animals, too, featured in Jarvan's life in ways that enriched his compassion. One winter, while riding through a snow-covered forest, he found a young deer caught in a hunter's snare. The animal's eyes were wide with panic, its breaths shallow as it strained against the rope. Jarvan dismounted slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice as he approached. He knelt in the snow, fingers numb, and carefully loosened the knot. The deer trembled but did not bolt. Jarvan stroked its neck gently, feeling the rapid beat of its heart gradually slow. He stayed there until the animal relaxed enough to step free. It looked back at him once with dark eyes before disappearing into the trees. Jarvan watched the spot where it had vanished, feeling a warmth in his chest despite the cold. The encounter reminded him that life in all its forms deserved respect. The smallest gesture, a hand offered in kindness, could bridge the gap between fear and trust. Later, he shared this story with children in the palace, encouraging them to treat animals with care. He saw the seed of gentleness take root when one child started bringing scraps to the sparrows that nested under the eaves. As the years went on, the question of Jarvan's formal coronation lingered. Some urged him to claim the title of king, believing that a ceremony would solidify his authority and reassure the populace. Jarvan, however, felt that the title itself would not change how he governed. He had already been acting with the responsibilities of a monarch, and he did not wish to take the crown merely for tradition's sake. One evening, he stood before a large mirror in his chambers, holding the crown that had been his father's. The metal was cool and heavy in his hands, adorned with symbols of unity and strength. He placed it upon his head briefly and studied his reflection. He did not see a different person. He saw a man who had been shaped by experiences both joyful and painful. He saw the lines etched by laughter and worry, the calm in his gaze that had taken years to cultivate. He lifted the crown off and set it back on its velvet cushion. He understood that leadership did not reside in a circlet of metal. It resided in everyday decisions, in compassion offered, in fairness enacted. Eventually, when he did accept the crown, it would be with the knowledge that it did not confer infallibility, but served as a reminder of his duty to all. Jarvan's relationship with Lux, Garen's younger sister, deepened as both faced the complexities of magic within Demacia. Lux had concealed her light-casting abilities for years, fearing the punishment that could accompany discovery. When her powers came to light during the rebellion, she braced for rejection. Instead, Jarvan approached her with a combination of firmness and warmth. He recognized the danger of untrained magic, but he also saw the radiance of her spirit. In a sunlit garden, they sat on a bench carved from pale marble. Lux's hands fidgeted in her lap. "I didn't want to betray anyone," she whispered. I didn't know what to do." Jarvan listened, then responded. "Fear makes people hide, but the only way to ensure safety is through understanding. Your magic is part of you. You must learn to control it for your own sake and for others." He arranged for trusted mentors to teach Lux in secret, ensuring she could harness her light without harming herself or others. Through their conversations, Lux found in Jarvan a confidant who balanced caution with acceptance. Jarvan, in turn, learned more about the personal toll of hiding one's true nature. Their bond influenced his policies, pushing him toward more inclusive practices. When, later, he created the council that included mages, Lux stood proudly as one of its advisors, her presence a symbol of hope and change. Quinn, the Ranger Knight of Demacia, also crossed paths with Jarvan during this time. Known for her falcon, valor, and her ability to navigate wild terrains, Quinn brought news of border movements and reconnaissance reports from the skies. Jarvan met with her in the field, impressed by her calm demeanor and sharp eyes. Valor circled above them, a blur of brown and white against the blue. Quinn spoke of the shifting habits of enemies and of the importance of understanding the land. She explained how she and Valor could see patterns in the way smoke drifted or in how birds scattered, telling her whether danger approached. Jarvan asked if he could accompany her on one of her patrols. She agreed. Together they rode out at dawn, Jarvan on horseback and Quinn on foot, her bow slung over her shoulder. At a high cliff, Valor returned to perch on her arm. Quinn pointed out a valley below where Noxian forces had once camped, the faint remains of their fire pits still visible. "Perspective changes everything," she said. "From here, you can see the paths they chose, the mistakes they made." Jarvan nodded, understanding that leadership too required constant shifts in perspective. The partnership with Quinn reinforced his belief that information gleaned from many sources, ground level and aerial, noble and common, was vital to making informed decisions. Festivals in Demacia had always celebrated martial prowess and historical victories, but Jarvan sought to expand their scope to honor the diversity of his people. During the annual Day of Founding, he invited artisans to craft displays that represented not only knights and battles, but also farmers, healers, bakers, and, for the first time, mages. A troupe of performers staged a play that told the story of a young mage who used her powers to save her village from a flood. Musicians composed songs that celebrated the harvest and the hope of spring. Dancers incorporated movements inspired by stories from Ionia and Piltover. Food stalls offered treats from various regions, honey cakes, spiced stews, pickled vegetables, creating a mosaic of flavors. Jarvan walked among the stalls, sampling dishes and talking with attendees. He laughed when a child painted a bright sunburst on his cheek. He listened to an old soldier recite a poem he had written about his first love. At the end of the festival, Jarvan took the stage. "Our strength lies not just in our swords," he said, his voice steady. "It lies in our stories, our songs, our shared humanity." The inclusion of mages sparked conversation, some of it uncomfortable, but the seeds of acceptance were sown through shared celebration and joy. Harsh winters tested Jarvan's policies of compassion. When snow blanketed the land and the wind howled, some could not afford enough firewood or food. Jarvan ordered that the palace kitchens prepare extra bread and stew, sending wagon loads to the poorest districts. He opened the palace great hall as a shelter, its hearths burning brightly, its stone floors covered with straw and blankets. Noble visitors frowned at the sight of peasants sleeping beneath tapestries. But Jarvan welcomed the mingling of classes. He personally served bowls of soup, sitting with families to hear their stories. One night, he played dice with children, their laughter filling the hall. He knew that generosity, in times of hardship, built trust that could not be quantified. When spring came and the snows melted, many returned the kindness in their own ways, repairing palace fences, planting flowers in the royal gardens, offering songs of thanks. Jarvan's actions during those winters became part of the oral history passed down among the people. Stories parents told their children by candlelight about a leader who opened his doors when the cold crept in. Though separated by miles, Jarvan maintained his connection to Shyvana through letters he wrote and stored in his desk. He knew not where she roamed, whether she explored deserts or crossed seas. Still, when the moon was full, he would sit at his table and write by its pale light. He described the reforms he had enacted, the challenges he faced, the progress and setbacks. He wrote of festivals and winters, of conversations with Lux, of his gratitude for the breathing technique she had taught him. He told her about the deer he had freed and the baby he had held, about the songs he had learned and the poems he had written. He admitted when he felt overwhelmed and when he felt hopeful. He folded these letters carefully and tucked them into a wooden box carved with dragons and suns. Perhaps she would never read them, but the act of writing made him feel connected to her still. Occasionally he would remove one letter and read it aloud softly, imagining Shyvana's bemused smile. He hoped that, wherever she was, she felt the warmth of his friendship across the miles. In his later years, though still not old by most measures, Jarvan began to mentor a young squire named Alistair, who had been orphaned during the rebellion. Alistair had bright eyes and an unquenchable curiosity that reminded Jarvan of his younger self. The boy asked questions about everything, why the flag of Demacia bore a specific shade of gold, why Petri's seat dampened magic, how one knew the right time to speak and the right time to be silent. Jarvan answered patiently, often turning the questions back to Alistair to encourage critical thought. He taught the boy to read maps, to write diplomatic letters, to care for armor. He shared stories of his adventures, emphasizing the lessons learned rather than the victories won. One evening, Jarvan handed Alistair the wooden bird Lena had carved. "This was given to me by a girl after the Argoth battle," he explained. "It has travelled with me since. I want you to have it now, to remind you that every decision we make affects someone." Alistair's eyes widened, and he held the carved bird reverently. Through mentorship, Jarvan ensured that the values he cherished, compassion, patience, courage, would live on beyond his own lifetime. He found joy in watching the boy grow, in seeing him adopt a thoughtful approach to every task. Guiding Alistair renewed Jarvan's own sense of purpose and connected him to the future he was helping to shape. Thus, dear sleepy summoner, the life of Jarvan IV unfurls across landscapes and years, a series of interwoven moments that reveal the depth of his heart and the breadth of his vision. His story teaches us that greatness is not a sudden blaze, but a steady glow fueled by empathy and perseverance. It shows that leadership is not a throne, but a path walked among one's people. It reminds us that every small act of kindness, freeing a deer, holding a newborn, listening to a complaint, builds a foundation that can bear the weight of crowns and kingdoms. As you drift towards sleep, imagine Jarvan once more standing beneath a starry sky, a gentle breeze tugging at his cloak, his gaze lifted toward the constellations that guided his ancestors. Let the rhythm of his footsteps become the rhythm of your breath. Let the cool night air in the mountains whisper you into dreams filled with soft light and steady courage. Rest now, knowing that in stories like his, hope and peace await. And there was yet one more moment to come that would shape the course of Jarvan's life and Demacia's destiny. After years of guiding his people without the title of king, after countless councils and journeys, after seeds of reform had begun to take root, the cause for him to be crowned grew once again. This time, Jarvan felt that the moment was right. He had not reached a place of perfect certainty. No leader ever does, but he had come to understand himself and his people more deeply. He knew that accepting the crown would symbolize his commitment to continue his work with renewed resolve. The day chosen for the coronation dawned clear and cool. The great city's streets were swept and lined with banners, their colors vibrant against the stone. Citizens from across the kingdom gathered, pressing shoulder to shoulder, their faces a tapestry of anticipation. Mages and non-mages stood side by side, soldiers in polished armor next to farmers in plain tunics, children hoisted onto parents' shoulders to glimpse history. The air was filled with the scent of candles and fresh bread, with the murmur of prayers and soft laughter. In the grand hall, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting hues of gold, blue, and green across the floor. The air vibrated with the silent presence of those who had come before, their portraits watching from the walls. Jarvan entered not in pomp, but with calm steps, wearing simple yet dignified attire. Shyvana, who had returned to witness this moment, stood among the honored guests, her eyes reflecting pride. Lux stood nearby, a symbol of change embraced. Garen, ever steadfast, flanked his friend with a hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. High Marshal Tiana and Xin Zhao looked on, representing wisdom and mentorship. Jarvan approached the center of the hall, where the crown rested upon a pedestal draped in white cloth. He paused, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply, recalling every lesson, every hand he had held, every tear he had witnessed. He felt the weight of expectation and the buoyancy of support. When he lifted the crown, there was no thunderous fanfare, no blaring horns. There was a collective intake of breath, a stillness that seemed to hold the world. Jarvan placed the crown upon his head, and in that quiet, his voice filled the hall. "People of Demacia," he began, his words clear and steady. "Today I accept this crown, not as a symbol of power, but as a symbol of responsibility. Our strength has always been our unity, our willingness to stand together in defense of justice and in pursuit of compassion. We have faced darkness from without and turmoil from within. We have learned that fear can divide us, and that understanding can bring us back together. I vow to lead with an open heart and a discerning mind, to listen as well as command, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to guide us towards a future where no child need hide who they are. We will honor our traditions and embrace our growth. We will walk forward together." Applause rose like waves, building from a gentle ripple to a resonant chorus. Jarvan looked out over the sea of faces and saw hope reflected back at him. It was a hope he felt too, not naive, but resilient. After the ceremony, Jarvan slipped away briefly to the garden his mother had once tended. The chimes tinkled softly, stirring memories. He sat by the fountain, his fingers trailing through the cool water. He removed the crown and set it beside him on the stone ledge, feeling its weight no longer on his head, but still present in his awareness. In the quiet of the garden, he spoke aloud to the memory of his parents. "I have taken on this role," he whispered. "I will carry it with humility. I will make mistakes, but I will not lose sight of why I chose to wear this crown. I will remember your guidance and the lessons of every person I have met." He listened to the sound of the water, to the rustling leaves, to the distant hum of the city celebrating. He felt peace settle over him, not because challenges had vanished, but because he knew he was not alone in facing them. He thought of Shyvana's unwavering courage, Lux's radiant light, Garen's steadfast loyalty, Xin Zhao's steady wisdom, Tiana's disciplined counsel, and the countless unnamed people who formed the heart of Demacia. He realized that leadership is a shared journey, a symphony of voices. And so, dear sleepy summoner, the story draws near its end for now. From birth to coronation, from dreams in a hidden garden to vows taken under stained glass, Jarvan IV's path has been one of growth, reflection, and deepening compassion. His life reminds us that no crown sits easily, that every decision carries weight, that genuine strength arises not from might alone, but from the courage to listen and to learn. As you close your eyes and drift into the realm of dreams, imagine sitting beside Jarvan by the fountain, the cool water soothing your fingertips, the soft bells chiming a lullaby. Feel the earth solid beneath you, the gentle crown of your own, headlight with possibility. Let the serenity of the garden seep into your bones. Let the knowledge that even the greatest of leaders seek moments of quiet remind you that you, too, deserve rest. Sleep now, allowing the rhythm of rippling water and the soft cadence of wind in leaves to guide you into peaceful slumber. The tale of Jarvan IV will continue, as all stories do, unfolding with each new dawn. But for tonight, let it rest with you, offering comfort and gentle strength.